everyone, and welcome to the Intro to Tower course. This lesson will simply cover the things you need to know and prepare before controlling any actual aircraft, but that doesn't make it any less important. As always, we'll start by introducing the actual position. Unlike delivery and ground, tower control is where you'll start to have many more responsibilities, so make sure to take your time learning and really prepare yourself. These responsibilities include selecting the departure and arrival runways, setting the ATIS, any operations on the runways themselves, including crossing, takeoff, landing, and lineup and wait, the separation of arriving and departing aircraft, and VFR aircraft in the vicinity of your airspace. Of course, top-down procedures also still apply, so if ground or ground and delivery are offline, those positions become your responsibility too. While it sounds overwhelming, don't worry because we'll be there to help you every step of the way. If you remember your area of responsibility is ground, tower is basically responsible for everything else. More specifically, tower control owns the runways and taxiways between the runways. That means that, for example, aircraft landing on runway 27 left at Tofan will remain on the tower frequency for taxi until they cross runway 27 right. At Willenthal, it's really just the runway, and at Delarue, it's just the opposite. Moving on, aircraft below flight level 100 or 10,000 feet may not exceed 250 knots. This regulation applies to all aircraft. However, keep in mind that the speed shown on the ATC scope is the aircraft's ground speed. This restriction applies only to indicated airspeed, IAS, which the pilot sees in their cockpit. Thus, an aircraft at 5,000 feet, for example, may have a ground speed of 265 knots, but still be at or below 250 indicated airspeed. Only when the aircraft's ground speed shows much higher than 250 knots, like 300 or above, should you advise the pilot of the 250 below 10,000 speed restriction. You may also ask aircraft to say airspeed if necessary. You should already be familiar with utilizing the SOPs by now, but with Tower, you'll just be using more of it. The SOP will help you determine which runways should be active, any departure instructions to give aircraft taking off, procedures if an aircraft goes around, and which direction to operate the traffic pattern, all of which you'll learn more about through the Tower course. Towards the end of this course, it could also be helpful to you to create a little cheat sheet with the procedures in the SOP, just so you don't have to scroll through it while controlling. The SOPs will tell you which runways to designate as active, but let's dive into that a little bit more. Firstly, runway numberings are not random. Obviously, the left and right in runway names comes from where the runway is relative to another parallel runway, but the runway number itself tells us the approximate heading of the runway. Just multiply the runway number by 10, and that's the runway heading. For example, runway 9er has a runway heading of 090. The other end of the runway, which operates in the opposite direction, a 180-degree difference, will always have a runway number with a difference of 18. The reciprocal of runway 9er would thus be 27, with a runway heading of 270. In the real world, runway headings are rounded up or down since they're not always exact multiples of 10, but at least for now in Flightline, all runway headings are nice multiples of 10. Next is wind direction. Contrary to what many may believe, the heading in the winds is actually the heading the wind is coming from. This means that if the wind is 360 at something knots, the wind is coming from the heading 360 or coming from the north and blowing southward. There are three relative types of winds based on the direction of flight of an aircraft. Going back to an aircraft taking off runway 9er on a heading of 090, any wind that is plus or minus 45 degrees from the aircraft's heading is considered a headwind since it's blowing towards the aircraft. In this case, winds from heading 045 to 135. When choosing an active runway, we generally want a headwind, and the SOPs follow this general rule. If the wind is plus or minus 45 degrees from the reciprocal of your heading, or 180 degrees in the opposite direction, which is 270 in this case, then it is a tailwind since the wind is pushing the aircraft from behind. Winds from heading 225 to 315 in this case. Anything else in between is considered a crosswind. Note that if you have a crosswind and the wind speed is greater than 35 knots, we do not consider it safe for operation and aircraft cannot be cleared for takeoff or landing. Now, you may have noticed that the weather and winds in Flightline tend to change quite frequently. Because of this, we will usually decide the active runway at the beginning of a control session and stick with it in spite of wind changes. That said, if the winds become a tailwind for a sustained period of time, or a crosswind makes another runway more suitable, then tower controllers can change the active runways, that is, of course with coordination. You'll have to update the ATIS with the new active runways, giving the new ATIS information the next letter in the phonetic alphabet. Then, ground will need to know about the new runway change since they taxi departing aircraft. Approach control will also need to know about the runway change as they are responsible for sequencing arriving traffic. Make sure that both controllers actually acknowledge that the runway change is in effect. Just saying it over TeamSpeak isn't enough to ensure that the relevant controllers know what's happening. As for aircraft already on approach or holding short of old active runways, allow these aircraft to land or take off respectively from that runway. It would be way too inefficient to switch them to the new active runway. The last topic for this intro to tower will be how to actually set the ATIS. An example ATIS is also pinned in the ATC announcements channel if you don't want to reference the slides. Firstly, you must type the /ATIS command and select the correct ATIS bot. ATIS bot 1 corresponds to the ATIS for Tofun, bot 2 is for Wellensol, and bot 3 is for Delarue. After selecting the right bot, all of the fields which you'll need to fill in will appear. You'll need the 4-letter code of the airport, the information letter you're assigning, the active departure and arrival runways, circuit direction as specified in the SOP, and wind and visibility information from in-game at the time of setting the ATIS. The weather changes often in Flightline as mentioned earlier, so don't update the ATIS every time the weather changes. The next items, cloud cover, temperature, and altimeter, are all made up by you. Cloud layer types are near the bottom of the pinned messages in ATC chat. The temperature is in degrees Celsius, and the standard altimeter for reference is 29902. For the remarks, you may choose whether or not to include any. The text-to-speech will do its best, but especially for airport names, you will have to spell things phonetically. That's all for now. Once again, there's a lot of information in a short video, so make sure to take your time understanding the concepts. Let us know if you ever have any questions. Good luck, and we'll see you on the scopes.